Hey, how you doing out there, family? We're here for the next episode of Don't Talk Politics. And we need you to go ahead and click subscribe for us right there on your YouTube channel. Click the subscribe button for us so that we can continue with this information. And for those of you who didn't know, my name is Brother Tehuti, and this is
Sundiatta.
And we're here with the most exciting topic today. We talked about this among ourselves all the time, and we felt that we really need to just start dealing with the foundations of white supremacy. And so we're calling this episode White Supremacy 101. And so we're just going to look at the all of the different tenets of white supremacy, its origin, and how it manifests and how it affects us even when we're not even aware that we are being affected by it. And it's a lot of things that's going on in the news today. Sundiatta was talking about an issue with the young brother, the entertainer. What was the entertainer's name?
Nick Cannon.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Go ahead and talk. Bring that to the forefront, and then we can go into it.
Yeah, Nick Cannon kind of, by the establishment standards, stepped out of line and spoke upon issues he wasn't prepared to really deal with in terms of the ramifications and political backlash he received from the Jewish community when he had Professor Grift on, and he attempted to discuss the history of white supremacy and white aggression. And the Jewish community came at him, and he wasn't really equipped, or he wasn't financially ready to take that hit. So he backed down, and he had to do some things. So we'll talk about that.
Well, the fact that they could even issue consequences
Right.
in itself,
Right.
And when we say Jewish community, we have to deal with that as well, because what makes them the custodians of Judaism. And how does that tie back to the origins of
That's right.
of that doctrine?
That's right.
So let's deal with this white supremacy 101. First of all, what would your definition of white supremacy be?
Oh, great question. Really the same definition in terms of power, the ability to define and to describe and really get the rest of the world to adhere to that definition and those descriptions, and in terms of placing white values and white culture as supreme on the planet in really an aggressive mode. So that's kind of a loosely based.
Well, that's good, and I've always said, people confuse the terms racism, white supremacy, as if it's any other form of racism on the planet, because we're talking about a system,
Exactly.
System that operates with prejudice, but it has the power. It's prejudice plus power. You cannot have simply a prejudice attitude towards someone or a bigoted perspective towards someone. White supremacy, it dictates consequences for non-white people and control for non-white people, and people do not equate the two, because no matter how bigoted a person may be or prejudiced to judge before, it's not going to affect the white people's income. Right. It's not going to affect where they live. It's not going to affect their employment. Nick Cannon. Right. It's not going to affect anything that they function, because that's a system. So the system of white supremacy is a global system of power control, and it can issue consequences at any time.
Great point. Excellent point. Yeah. Well, to add to that. It's so many times you hear our people speak, and sometimes when they speak on political or racial issues, they'll start off by saying, well, I'm not racist, but I don't mean to be racist, but, and, it's sad that the victim of white supremacy behaves as though they're the perpetrator of white supremacy.
I'm glad you said that, because the victims, white supremacy as a system would not work unless the victims practice white supremacy.
Great point.
We're the propagators of white supremacy with one another, how we deal with one another, how do we speak with one another, how we put each other down, how we don't trust one another, how we don't find value in our own being, in our own image and self-worth. And this is classic. It comes out most of the time or more clearly in children. As you remember, we're going to get into that when we do our education piece. But if we're going to deal with Brown versus the Board of Education, you remember Dr. Kenneth Clark, who he conducted the doll test to see the preferences for color. And the black children, even though they were segregated or separated, I should say, chose the white doll. And so it seems like the solution was to integrate in with moving people next to people, as if now you're by the people that you already felt were the superior or the top of the human chain. You're being next to them now. Somehow it's supposed to elevate your self-esteem, your race esteem. So it's very important that we understand that.
Big misunderstanding with that, and then that's another thing where they teach that racism is taught. So if you get with white children early, they'll learn not to be racist, or they'll learn not to fear us, or they'll learn, and then we'll start talking in languages that really blame us for the hate. They'll learn not to fear us. But then also, we forget in times of our enslavement that black women actually had racist babies at their breasts. You can't get any closer than that. And if we forget that many times enslaved Africans would play along with their future so-called masters on the plantation. So it wasn't a lack of familiarity between one another. It was the fact that the racist system was put in effect, and as that child got older, they automatically fell in line with their role as a race supremacist. And that's another thing in terms of these protests. We see a lot of Europeans and white children out there protesting, and I'm hearing so many black people say, oh, this is different. With a lot of them are out, and we forget the hippies were out there in the 60s, and those same hippies became the Reagan Democrats, because Reagan took over 90% of the states and when he won, and that included many of those former so-called hippies that played or protested with us.
Right, and with all of that, once they come into the fold, they come back to white supremacy, because regardless if a person's relationship or their heart really doesn't adhere to the quote-unquote redneck cracker that you see on toting and whistling Dixie and all of that kind of stuff, that in no way stops white people from benefiting from white supremacy, and I haven't heard any of them. No one say that they reject the benefits that they've received from a white supremacist system. So, it's time out for that hold hand and singing Kumbaya when there's no meaningful structural change. So if we see meaningful structural change, then they can show some validity. That's a good point. To that statement.
That's a great point, because one of the things that we find is that when we were winning, as John Henry Clark said in the 60s, we had a chance to go any direction we wanted, because we actually had the United States on its knees, and we decided to come back into the fold. And white supremacy has a way of camouflaging itself. In other words, you're marching what you feel is against white supremacy, and all of a sudden they'll flanker back and be marching with you and pushing goals that you didn't even know that you wanted, or goals that really are really anti what you really believe in your values. In other words, like these Black Lives Matter. We say Black Lives Matter, but really we should say Black Power Matters. Exactly. Black Power Matters, not Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter means that you're still operating in the fold of white supremacy. In other words, you have a I think you could. You always speak about this. You have a supreme authority over you, and you're appealing to that authority to recognize your life. Right. But when you say Black Power Matters, you're speaking to one another and reinforcing the idea that we need to be in control, have autonomy over our lives.
Yeah, that's from
our institutions.
That's from Brother Malcolm's teachings. You can't beg another man for freedom. You can't. You're giving him the power of supremacy over you by begging him. That's right. So you can't say you're anti-white supremacy and you're asking people for acceptance. That in no way, shape, or form is self-determining, and it's not a factor in your empowerment and your taking control over your life. Good point. So I think a lot of this in terms of theories and things, we need to get into some of the theories behind white supremacy, because a lot of things that that young brother Nick Cannon was speaking about was coming actually from Frances Cress Welsing, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, peace be upon her. She's an ancestor now and a powerful one. But she clearly, along with Neely Fuller,
Yes.
who she gives credit to opening her up to explore the details of white supremacy, because until we look at it, you will only be confused, according to Dr. Fuller. You will only be confused by what you speak or think, unless you understand white supremacy. So let's try to help each other understand white supremacy. So when you're talking white supremacy, we're not speaking simply of skin color. No, we're not talking simply skin color. We're talking about the system that's necessary for white genetic survival. This is what Nick Cannon was speaking about, but he really didn't go into depth on that. And Dr. Welsing did tremendous work on the psychology behind this mentality. What is the psychology? What is the thinking? And how is that destructive thinking born, cultivated, and birthed into a movement in society that makes them want to control people and makes them so aggressive towards people of color? They're 1/9 of the world's population,
And dwindling.
and dwindling. And you can't go anywhere and find where they're not in power, where they are. So, and even when they're the minority, they're still in power, and there's no explanation for that. And people keep ignoring the global system of white supremacy. So we can go a little bit into the history of that.
Yes, we can. We know there's a book that's everyone should get, actually written by a European, Michael Bradley out of Canada, I believe. He wrote a book, The Iceman's Inheritance.
That's right.
And it's a very good book in terms of him breaking down the just the behavior and the instincts of whites and how they came out of a cold and harsh environment, and they really section off life and really put in different places in terms of what they thought you should be. We are harmonious people,
right?
And they kind of always want to section off, like male
segregate,
male versus female,
right.
Old versus young, and they actually have a competition with one another. And this is Michael Bradley, a European, who broke it down pretty good.
He sure
in
did.
Iceman's Inheritance. Make sure you all get that book.
Yes, and I don't know. We don't have our pictures, but I do have that in some of my thing. But we'll get that to you, and you'll be able to look at that and with the titles and everything, all the books that we're speaking about. And in that book is very important, because he says clearly that there is no avoiding the truth. The problem with the world today is white men. And he said white men specifically because, they also oppress white women. And, a lot of that is put on, the patriarchy system, but nobody talks about what gave birth to it. So let's look at what was said in some of that doctrine. If you go, say, 100,000 years ago, you're not going to have anything but Africans on the planet.
That's right.
However, during the Ice Age or the Glacial Age, if you go before that, whatever, as they were trapped in the area that now is known as Europe, or the mountains in the Caucasus Mountains, where the term Caucasoid comes from, and the classification, by the way, of people in terms of color was done by a scientist, anthropologist by the name of Johann Blumenbach. He's the first person to classify people, human beings, in terms of race, and he was an anthropologist, and he broke them into 5 categories. But we're going to deal with the European, or commonly known as the white man, or the Caucasian, coming from those mountains. So when they were trapped up there, they weren't used to a harsh environment, snow. They barely had the understanding of how to make fire. So to them, nature became something that was, quote unquote, a hardship, something to be against. And so they huddled in those caves and froze in those caves, and they started functioning on just the survival level. That's what Nick Cannon was speaking about. When you function on that level, then out of necessity, there's certain adaptations that take place, and they're not just physical adaptation; they're also mental adaptations. You're angry because you have to go out into a harsh environment. All the animals out there you feel are attacking you. And with this mentality comes this warrior, or not warrior really in sense of a skilled fighter or noble, but an aggression that comes forth out of that. This is what Nick Cannon was speaking about. And with that aggression, you have certain mentalities. There are certain enzymes that we can do current studies about that come, the adrenaline that they speak about, fight or flight. And there's also a short temperament that is a result of that. So you showed, I remember this test years ago, they had an albino gorilla.
Right, you speak about that.
And the albino gorilla versus the pigmented gorilla. The pigmented, they held up the mirror, and the pigmented gorilla just waved and was playing with the image. He saw himself. He saw others in that pigmentation. But when they held that mirror up to that albino, when he saw his image, he smashed the mirror, angrily smashed the mirror. So when we're talking about this system, if this aggressive behavior has been cultivated over time, then it manifests in all of the systems. You have to have armies. You have to have control of resource. And then Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, we'll come to the call in 1 second. She broke down the need for genetic survival, which means when you have people mixing, if you truly have integration, then white people don't exist as white people. They exist, but they don't exist as white people. They exist as people of color. They have to come into the fold of the rest of human, because when they have a child, the child is going to take on the dominant gene of the person of color. And African people are the most dominant. Did you say we have a caller? Okay, go ahead, caller. I don't hear him. No. Caller.
Mic check. Caller.
Okay, as if when they get in, just let them jump on in. We'll keep going.
And then if you look at the history, like what's very interesting about that, it's really consistent, and it's not just a theory. It really proves itself out in history. Like if you look at Sparta, and you look at their newborns and how they taught them to be aggressive and steal and cheat. They actually said these are admirable traits. If you look at Hannibal, who came from the northern part of Africa, and his fight against Rome, and how when he would defeat a general, he would bury it with purpose and with respect. But vice versa, if the Roman would.
Hello?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, very well.
Oh, good afternoon, brothers. How you doing?
Good.
Yeah, my name is Mario. I was just calling because when you guys were talking about how we actually help with the actual, the white supremacists, and I want to just drop a quick little story about how I was formerly married to a West African, and she was from Cameroon. And what happened is that a lot of times when I was around her people, she would always call me. I mean, their people would call me a kata, and I didn't know what that was. And one day I was watching that movie Sugar Hill, and I saw a scene where Wesley Snipes was dealing with some Nigerians, and they kept calling him a kata, and they end up saying, "Yeah." He says, "What's a kata mean?" And they're like, "Oh, that's the Black American slave, or the N-word." And, of course, Wesley Snipes, went crazy or whatever. But I went back to my wife and I said, is it true that Akata means this? And she said, I guess so, yeah. But I never looked at it as a bad term. And when you talk to these guys, they look down on Black Americans. And how can we embrace Africa or, different countries in Africa as the motherland when they're not even embracing us who've been removed from Africa?
Now,
and I think that feeds into a lot of the way the white supremacists think, because another thing they would do also is one of the guys told me how he would go to Texas and he would hang out with all the, rednecks at the bar and how they would be cool with him. And he said they're cool with him because he's not Black American. He's Nigerian.
okay.
And he would hold himself like, I'm not like those guys.
Okay.
1 second, just hang on. Hang on a second. So that's well. First of all, let's clarify. Let's just clarify things. When you say they, which they, specifically, what are they? Because we're there's a billion people. So which they are you speaking on in terms of Africa?
Oh well, there was two different groups. There was one that was a Nigerian group because I was always around Nigerians and Cameroonians. So,
okay, so those two groups. Okay, now
yeah,
and then on top of that also. So let's look at the well, let me ask you this. So one simple question, and I'm gonna let you clarify, and then we're gonna go on with it. But so your solution to that would be what in terms of how should we behave because of this reality that you see? Tell me that.
Oh, what would the solution be?
Yes.
I feel like as a whole, I mean, Africans that feel like Black Americans are less than them. I feel like there should be an education somewhere. We should educate them to reverse that thinking, because that doesn't help us as a overall people when we're divided.
Okay, great point. Now we're going to hold that. So we're going to get into what we're talking about. I'm glad you brought that up. Just like you're saying, it's the same attitude. It's funny you mentioned Wesley Snipes, because the same Wesley Snipes who was in New Jack, what was it? New Jack City, where they were exhibiting very hostile behavior toward other Black people, and they were actually selling, substances to Black people that broke us down. So, like you're saying, and I agree with you, caller, in terms of there's a re-education that needs to take place, because one place that white supremacy exists most is, as we know, is in the mind, because Bobby Wright calls it menticide. It's menticidal behavior, and I'm glad that you had a mature attitude about it in terms of. You're dealing with Africans who are educated by Europeans. And Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, he speaks about the education system being set up by the West. And that education system teaches the African to be more European than African. So if we look at original African societies, they were almost too open to a fault in terms of really not being hostile to foreign visitors. So when we look at the modern day African, we're looking also really at the modern day African American, because we all are being taught by a European mindset that teaches us to not only move away from our values, but actually be hostile to our values.
Right, and it's important that you remember that the caller's point was, in fact, reinforcing what we were saying. It's the system of white supremacy. Colonialism exists in Africa. The mindsets are divide and conquer. I mean, that's just part and parcel. That's one chapter, divide and conquer. You find us divided on everything possible. You can go to the Willie Lynch letter if you want. We'll be divided on every little minor detail possible. And when we do these things, when we have these type of divisions, we fail to use our power, our strength. In bringing our strength together, we can strike a blow, but we don't do it because we're too busy arguing over petty things. Like we're one people. We're an African people globally. Okay, that's it. If we properly numbered, we're well over 1 billion people on the planet. So we have to start functioning as such. Our survival depends on that. And to anti-white supremacy would be unity, you know, and
to piggyback on what he was saying, Bill Russell's daughter wrote a paper in college, and she spoke on how if an African American goes to South Africa, you're given honorary white status. If African comes here, they're given not really a status, but they're treated so the whole purpose of that is that we do not see ourselves as one. Because if you're a minority on the planet, you have to come up with a way to make that majority break down in pieces. And I love the caller's solution. His solution wasn't like, oh, yeah, we'll forget them. He's like, no, just re-educate. That's the whole key. And we're starting to get there with these mediums. We're starting to re-educate. And we've been to the African continent. We have to say though, we didn't really find that kind of. We found a very love and openly environment. And I've been a number of times. As a matter of fact, I did business there, and it's a very opening and welcoming environment. And then also I have to say this though. When I was in school, I remember there was a Chinese or Japanese student there, and they said when they would go back to their home country, they had a name for them, because it signified how the fact that they had been westernized, and they were going back home. So you find it very interesting that other cultures have this same type of thing where the authentic culture has to look at those who have been outside for whatever reason, and they kind of have to give it a name, but
because
I think they're mature about that.
Yeah, I think they feel that for some reason. Those that are westernized feel that they have this better status, and they seem to look down upon their origin, and quite naturally that's going to be rejected.
And we saw that, and we actually saw that on the African continent. We saw young lady, or not a young, but older lady there who, because of her years of conditioning here, and she didn't realize it, but she had a condescending attitude towards Africans there. So you just have to be, and it's the same thing that we practice here. Wherever I go, there's songs you always hear in rap songs. If you don't belong here, don't come here. So we're gonna move on from that, though.
Right. So let's look at some of the reasons behind this white supremacy. It shows up in all people areas. So it's in education, it's in economics, it's in religion, it's going to be in politics for sure. Yes. It's on display. So let's talk about that. When we talk about white supremacy, we get arguments all the time. Well, that doesn't matter because I'm a Christian. I was like, no, it's present in Christianity, and you can't deny that it's not. We could go to Scripture, but that's not necessary. Let's just look at it from religious politics. When the papal bull was issued between Spain and Portugal, giving permission for them to enslave all infidel people, and then they define infidels as black people. And even though historically Ethiopia under King Azana was the first Christian nation. It was not. The people think it was Rome. It wasn't Rome. It was Ethiopia. They fled to back south to Ethiopia.
Matter of fact, if you look in the Bible, you'll find references to Ethiopia and Egypt about 88 times. You won't find that in terms of any European country.
You won't see any European country
being represented. But 88 times in the Bible, you'll find our names, and yet somehow they've flipped the script and have us believing that we are heathens.
Right, and all of these points are made because. It is taught, and when that is taught, and when people say the image or the religious image of God being changed by Michelangelo and all of those
inmates.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're doing all of this image or theft. That's a theft of spirituality. Because. The people who are perpetrating these aggressions and crimes against humanity are deifying themselves.
That's right.
And we accepting those images, you can't just say, well, I see it, but it's not having an effect on you. We'll go right back to Kenneth Clark with the doll test, and they replicated that test. There's still, the majority of black children think that white dolls or white images are better than the black ones. So when we look at this, let's look at some of the science behind it, like Sheikh Anta Diop. If we could speak on the African origin of civilization. Okay, this is proven scientifically, the origin of the human species was indeed in Africa. Now the whole debate splits with this concept of evolution versus degeneration. And the question is, which one is it? Is it evolution or is it degeneration? So all of these people that claim that racism is by ignorant people, we beg to differ. There's scientific examples over and over again of them trying to prove an unprovable fact. African people are unquestionably, irrefutably the original people of the planet, and all other people came from African people. So the status, this is back to Francis Wilson, the status of albinism or a lack of pigmentation is a deficient state. They flipped that to try to make it a superior state, and it's not. It's a deficient state. Right. It lacks pigment. When you say colored, we were going over the terms, black, colored, African. When you say colored means they said to put color in. Right. When all other examples of that, if you have a pitted fruit, you're taking the seed out. Right. If you have a colored people, really are people that you took the color out. Right. But again, we never understood these definitions because we were just reacting under the yoke of oppression. Right.
And what's interesting about Sheikh Diop, and what's sad about it is when after he came up with his discoveries and he presented it to his people in Senegal, the very people, the young people he was trying to present it to and tell them this new thinking, they actually fought him. They actually stood up for the white theory that whites were the originators of humanity, and it was, so that showed you how deep that the white supremacy mindset is, But we should not, and I want to but the caller made a great point. We should not meet that with hostility. We need to meet that with information, right? And we can't meet that with distance and alienating ourselves from our people. We got to meet that with embracing and then educating them, because all of this comes down to the fact that their behavior is driven by the fact that they're 1/9 of the world's population, and they must not only survive, but they have to conquer. There are people, and let's go back in history once again. You look at Greece and Rome, and how they looked at the outside world as being barbarians and alienated and hostile, except for Africa. They did have a deep respect for Africa, because they realized that all the greatness is coming out of northern Africa. But if you look at their behavior, their how they behave toward their women, how they behave toward one another, man to man, how it formulated their sexuality. It all comes out of the fact that they came out of this environment that was abnormal, and he looked at nature as something that could be conquered, something that could be equal.
That had to be conquered.
That's something that could be bested. And, whereas we looked at nature, that's why Africans are so quick. If you come up with a religion, Africans are going to adopt it. They're going to bring it along with the traditional, but they're going to adopt it. Mormonism, you just name it, because they say, hey, if you're speaking about the higher power, we're with it, and we're the most. And if you look at the African names, it's all within the African names how they always are speaking of deities and always something spiritual. Right. This is because they have a love base for nature.
Let's go to the caller. We have a caller. Once again, the number to call in is 424-390-6993. That's 424-390-6993. Go ahead, caller.
Hello. How you doing?
Yes.
Good. We hear you.
Hello.
Hello, how you doing?
Yeah, good. Go ahead, brother. You have a question?
All righty. Is this brother Tehuti?
Tehuti, yes.
Tehuti.
Yes, sir.
And brother
Sundiatta. Yes, that's him.
Sundiatta.
Yes. What's your question, brother? Go ahead. We're listening.
All right. I wanted to shine on the orientation of white supremacy, and the orientation of the original, when white people was created. White people wasn't, the original white, the white phrase of white people was created in America, and they didn't exist until 1965. And
Wait. I'm sorry. Repeat that last
The
sentence one more
how do you
time.
say the origin of supremacy of racial supremacy is is truly based off the five Confederate states that went against slavery. And a lot of brothers and sisters in America don't understand our true history of America. A lot of people don't understand if they hold the last name Davis, Jefferson, Price, Johnson,
Right.
Westcott, Hill, Hood.
Okay,
All
got it.
these were the Confederate generals
Okay.
inside of the Confederate Army that pretty much once they killed Lincoln, they sat at the table and was willing to negotiate and said, "Y'all got to see the big picture.
But brother,
We ain't going to be killing each other during the Civil War.
right. Let me stop you
We
there
got
because
these niggas under
we're talking about a global system.
Yeah.
That
Sometimes,
is true. It manifests inside the
But the
United
system is
States.
stated to the families who run America.
Well, yeah, but it's a global system,
yeah,
brother.
it
That's
started
what we're talking about.
long
No,
They,
before.
or it's you think it's global, but it's
yeah,
No, it's
appreciate.
yeah. Thank you, brother, for calling, and please just listen up and just hear us as we try to explain the global system. And sometimes we have a friend in Nigeria, in Ghana. He always says sometimes we believe that this is all about us in America. When remember, you got to remember there are a billion African people. At least 2 billion African people around the world. We're talking about America, where we're at, like white supremacy was formulated in 1965, and Abraham Lincoln. No, brother, it goes way, way back before that.
Even 1865 is not no brother. Is birth out of slavery and capitalism. That's when white supremacy really came to the forefront. Like your ancient Romans and your Greeks, they were still worshiping African deities. Zeus is an African deity. Apollo, all of them were African deities, but they won't let that out. You guys, we encourage you to read the book Black Athena by Martin Bethal and Stolen Legacy by George G.M. James. You can get the information. It's readily available. But back to this point of global white supremacy, we really must deal with how this manifests in our curriculums, in the propaganda. Because I want to talk about you mentioned the Jewish people with coming down with consequences for Nick Cannon, and we have to deal with that because usually all of these things come about regarding the atrocities that were committed in the Holocaust. And we talk about that. We're a loving people. We don't want any of our people suffering. And of course, we were the bleeding hearts for that. But that no way, shape, or form compares to the hell of a cost that African people have been suffering for well over 500 plus years. And it's a continuing onslaught from all people. All people participate in white supremacy. I must stress that. All people participate in white supremacy. Now let's give the example on the African continent in what was known then as German Southwest Africa. In German Southwest Africa is the current day Namibia. But in German Southwest Africa, the Germans wholesale slaughtered the Herero people and the Nama. Had a place around called Shark Island. Now they openly starved them, massacred, raped the women, every type of atrocity possible, and they were openly experimenting, severing people's heads, doing lobotomies. All of these under the guide of the chief scientist or medical person in the area by the name of Eugen Fischer. That was his name. Now Eugen Fischer later set up the concentration camps in Auschwitz in Nazi Germany when they were
this was around 1904, 1905.
19 prior to that.
Right.
Now
it was a trial run for
the
later.
trial run took place in German Southwest Africa, and no one, including the Jewish people living in Germany, had anything to say when they were practicing on African people.
Nor the Jews who were living in Southern Africa.
In Southern Africa
setting
as
up
well.
The diamond trade at the same time. You know, they
The De Beers and all of that.
They were coexisting very well with one another as they
had no problem with
heaped oppression on our people.
That's right. Yeah. And it was an unholy alliance that was still today. Even afterwards, when Israel came into being, first they were looking at Uganda. They were looking all over the place for a quote unquote homeland for the nation or the state of Israel after World War II.
Right, even the Americas.
Even exactly. So, but they settled on Palestine.
Right.
But those people still aligned themselves with the apartheid system of South Africa, trained the military and the police, and sided with the government in oppressing black people. Nobody brings that up. You know, stop reacting to a term such as anti-Semite. Only one people on this planet can claim all people, and that's African people. That's right. We're the mother and the father of humanity. So we can't be anti-anything without being anti-self. That's right. But what we are is anti-evil, anti-oppression, anti-destructive behaviors, and all of those things manifest inside of white supremacy.
Yeah, and that's a great point. You look at, it was sad, the interview that Nick Cannon was forced to have because he was ill-equipped to go back at the rabbi who basically got him to accept the role of the violator, when in actuality the history of his people is actually the history of a people who've been violated.
Even when the Nation of Islam put out their book, The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, they used the documents. It wasn't an opinion.
No.
You know, it was just laid out with the documents, which is how we do. You know, we're going to be scientific about our approaches. Right. And when they did that, it came out that 1/4 of the southern plantation owners had Jewish ancestry. Right. So the question is, did you participate in our oppression? Yes. Have we participated in your oppression? No. And as a matter of fact, we liberated them as the Black Panther tank brigade went in to those concentration camps and liberated the Jewish people who were being abused there. It was black soldiers that liberated them. That's right. But then those same black soldiers couldn't come back on the same plane or on a train, and they would treat the German prisoners of war and eat with the German prisoners of war while the black soldiers would be relegated to not even the mess hall. They would have to eat outside and suffer the same humiliation, even though they had liberated those Jewish people.
Wow. And then it's sad when you look at the history of Marcus Garvey and the large movement that happened 1917, 1918. And it was actually the NAACP that was spearheading the movement to end Marcus Garvey's reign here. And they were basically set up by the Jewish people. Matter of fact, the judge who presided over Marcus Garvey's deportation was a Jewish man, you know. And then we look at Joel Springard, who was W.B. Du Bois thought he was his great friend, and he tricked him into getting black men to join up for World War I, which he later regretted. W.B. Du Bois regretted that. Right. And then, matter of fact, to this day, the highest award you can get in the NAACP is the Springard Award. And we look at their behavior and how they manipulated us to really push for their advantageous positioning in America, because it was closed off to them. So they used us as a buffer to open up society in terms of civil rights so they could join those country clubs.
Right.
And they could have those big corporations.
Break down the barriers that they wanted broken down.
But they didn't want to be the figurehead because they didn't want to suffer anti-Semitism, as they call it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But don't forget that the NAACP didn't have a black president.
Right.
Until, I believe, the 70s.
Right.
So they didn't even have a black head.
Right.
of a so-called black organization.
Right, exactly.
Until then. So
yeah, and once again, Ed Barney, who's the father of propaganda, spoke to the second convention of the NAACP. So we had this very strange relationship in terms of, and then it all came to a head in New York in the 1960s when go ahead, speak on that.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
But we're back to the point that this is how white supremacy manifests itself. In a black organization, white supremacy, whites are at the head of it, or they're behind it, or they're the financier. And the bigger picture is we don't feel that we can function on our own with our own governance of our own volition and of our own thought, and any validity come out of that. So that's what we're speaking about, the mindsets. What is the mindset that has us believing that our African brothers are more distant to us than us being here among white supremacists?
And
Yeah,
and then we just imagine there nowhere does it exist white organizations that are funded and founded by black people
or in people of color,
black people, so-called people of color, and it's one of those things that you look at and you just you take it for granted. You don't even see it anymore. You just say, okay, as a matter of fact, you feel satisfied to see a white head come into your organization. I was just talking to someone today about this. It's to break it down to the plain level of because we have no black solidarity when it comes to doing business. We want people to do business with us, but we're somewhat reluctant to do business with ourselves, in terms of, like, if I'm going out looking for someone to work for me, I'm going to look for actually somebody other than me. How they always say, oh, get yourself a Jewish lawyer. Right. But then when it's time for me to get a job, I want I want a black community to take my being black in terms of a merit.
But see, one more point on the Jewish question. See, it frustrates me for people to have the perception that the Ashkenazi or the Yiddish speaking people are the original Jews, or that there are not African Jews. There are African Jews. There are African Hebrews. And Dr. Ben was an African Jew from Ethiopia. Speak
on their treatment when they go to Israel.
And when they go to Israel, exactly. When they go to Israel, they're still discriminated against. They're still assaulted and abused. In fact, Netanyahu was under scrutiny behind the treatment of Africans in Israel. When the Ethiopian Jew goes to Israel, they were asking them to be recircumcised to come into the country.
As though they weren't authentic.
Exactly. And that's where the original Pentateuch and the first 5 books of Moses and all of that, they still have that. But again, they define who is and who is not a quote unquote Jew.
Now just think about what we're saying though. So here you have them re-circumcised, and Nick Cannon brings up the question of, are you all authentic? And he just brings up the question, he gets attacked. They actually go so far as to say, we need to cut you open again, and they're not attacked at all. Just think about that. And then we look at Israel's behavior in terms of how they related to South Africa and how they helped South Africa try to develop a nuclear bomb, how they trained the troops down there to deal with apartheid because they were dealing with their separate state.
Because oppressed people support oppressed people.
Now they
USA, Union of South Africa, United States of America, Israel. Oppressed people support oppressed people.
Now they're
oppressors.
You had these acts that actually cause people to lose their life. And it is not seen as the same way as Nick Cannon, who only spoke and brought up questions that should have been answered with facts, not condemnation, not this ambiguous term of anti-Semite.
Well, when you raise a question, they're practicing a debate technique, a Jewish debate technique called ad hominem. You attack the person, not the information. They will attack you and call you all kind of names. You're a militant, you're a hate-filled, all of these adjectives, but they never refute any of the information. And we have to be factual and scientific. Our people, we always act on emotion because emotion puts us in motion. But we have to be scientific in our analysis, and we definitely have to put forth facts and information to refute the things that that constantly are put before us. And see, we don't do that. We'll go ahead and be reserved and look as if these people have legitimate points when they don't.
Right.
And when you have the information, they leave the room.
Right.
I guarantee you, because it's another thing that has been taught, that when they cannot win, when there's superior information in the room, they will leave. So white supremacy, again, is the belief that white is right. And we have to correct that. And the reason why it's browbeaten into us, again, is it was done to us through religion. It basically stole our soul. You know, we left our soul and adopted a spirit. But that spirit was a spirit of capitalism. It was a spirit of profit. It was a spirit of exploitation. That's right. And we relegated our children to that system without informing them what it is.
And we believe that this thinking or this spirit leads itself to what we look at then later on and call black on black crime.
Right.
Because it has to start first in the mind, what Bobby Wright said, menticide. And then when you see young black children, and somehow, and I'm not advocating that this should happen, but somehow in a city where there are millions of white young boys, but a bullet never seems to find a young black. I'm not saying that should happen. I'm just saying that if you look at the statistics, the numbers, it just shows there's a clear intent of a black boy to kill and hunt another black boy. As a matter of fact, you can see it in the names of our rappers, the lynch mob. Who uses the name lynch mob when you know the history of lynching in our country? Because they have adopted the thinking. And they see themselves when they look in the mirror. Go ahead.
Just think about all the gangsters. You name yourself Baby Capone.
Yeah.
Little Scarface.
Yeah.
Or what's the other one? Siegel.
Yeah.
Benny Siegel. And all of these.
You're like junior mafia.
Exactly.
You call yourself the junior mafia. Like there's a major mafia that you're really imitating, you're following. And so even in our destruction of our people, especially in the destruction of our people, you see this behavior of I am mirroring this white supremacist mentality that I have practiced. We're actually gonna have a show on that, black on black crime, because so many people get so confused with that in terms of so-called Black on Lives Matters marching, and they never say nothing about black on black. We're gonna talk about how black on black crime is really a result of white on black crime. So right. That's so we're really gonna get into that.
So that's is very important, and one of the points that you just made, I'd like to talk about it, because how are we conditioning ourselves and our children, especially, by all of the images and all of the conversations that we have. It reminds me of a lesson we used to teach about how do you make a soldier for white supremacy in the black community. I said, so the first thing that they teach us is in terms of time. What is the base unit in time? The smallest base unit in time is what? A second. So second means not first. So you're not going to be first. Conditioning, we're talking. You are second. And then what? Minute, spelled minute. That means small and insignificant. So now you're second and you're small. And what's next? Hours. It's ours, not yours.
Exactly.
You will never get this. That's white supremacy speaking to you. And after hours, it's what? Days. Like Spike Lee said, you're in a daze, D-A-Z-E. Walking around, dreaming, playing, while these people are stealing and taking our essence. And after a daze, we go to the week, and we live for the weekend. Well, which one is your weekend? Is it this one or is it the other one? So you live for that weekend, and they focus everything on that weekend, and we chase and we find it, and we run for that, and that's our focus. But there's not our strong end. We are spiritual people with a Godhead. That's why Hermakhet, who you know as the Sphinx, was presented with the lion body, the beast body, but with a Godhead. So it shows you that all of that nature is in us. However, we have a spiritual connection that goes much higher, and we evoke that, and when we want to be great. So after that was what? We went to what? Month, spelled moneth, and we are moaning. We're in suffering and pain every day. Blood stains the hands of the USA. That's another line, but I'll do that on another time. After month is what? The year, which represents the yearlings or the babies. And that's who they focus on, generation after generation. Like you said earlier, they were afraid of us in the 60s. We had them on their heels and could have taken them any direction, but we ran back to our habit. What we're used to is white supremacy, and we can never break that without acknowledging it and divorcing ourselves from it. It has to be a divorce. After that was year and then decade. You're decayed like your teeth decay. They're decaying our youth. Our youth are being programmed by pop culture into all of these crazy categories, identifying themselves in all these different sexual definitions and all this stuff that has nothing to do with their head, nothing to do with their vision, nothing to do with their connection to the Creator, nothing whatsoever to do with that. But we allow them to decay our youth. And after the decade is what? Score. And they're scoring points. They're scoring points. And they're sitting back watching, marking it. And then after the score, you have what? 100 years. Yep, that's a century. You became that soldier. A century is the Roman term for soldier. Wow. And that's what you've become, that soldier for white supremacy. So that's what we're speaking about.
Yep. And in the pop culture, it's been tried to push and conveyed to you. John Singleton had that movie Baby Boy, where he used the concepts of Francis Cress Welsing to put across a black male in this society and how he
cannot be a man. He never actualizes himself in being a responsible man. And so this is why we say these terms. And we have to establish this as we move along. We start getting really into politics. We have to establish the basis so people understand that, okay, when we start referring to white supremacy, okay, and you all will know to go back to that. Go to chapter 1 where it says white supremacy, okay, failure to really live up to black autonomy, black power. And it's not Black Lives Matter, it's Black Power Matters. Because if you have power, everything else will take care of itself. That's it. And it's all about power. All the voting, everything else was
about power.
Was a cry for power.
Our people didn't die to vote. Our people died to have power. Because we know this, because as soon as they had a chance
and they assumed
to establish independent institutions, they did on their terms.
They did it in the first thing. They called their first church African Methodist Episcopalian Church.
Yeah, exactly.
So when we always had an identity with Africa, because we knew that we belonged to a higher source and a higher power, and the power begins with defining yourself and being comfortable in your own skin. So white supremacy has made us uncomfortable in black skin. That's why we tolerate our children being murdered. That's why we tolerate what happened to Sandra Bland. That's why we tolerate what happened to Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. That's why we tolerate what happened to Michael Brown. That's why we tolerate what happened to Tamir Rice, and on and on. So our problem is that we have not separated ourselves from white supremacist mentality. Until we do that, we will continue to be 2020 slaves. And with that note, I guess we'll say I do until the next time. Don't talk politics. Please click the subscribe button to We Are LA. And please tune in next week. We have some more for you. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank Sundiatta. I want to thank Brother A1, who is the producer of all of this. And we just going to make it better the next time. All right. Hotep.